Starfield had all the hype and promises of delivering the style of RPG that every Bethesda fan fell in love with, but does it fill the void of what modern gamers are looking for? Having over 120 hours in this game now, this is my take on the most honest and unbiased review of Starfield, not as a Bethesda RPG, but as a brand new game. I can remember becoming obsessed and wowed with the Elder Scrolls games from the first day I ever played Oblivion when my friend gave me a CD and said, "Dude, you've got to play this game." From that day on, I played every game in the Elder Scrolls series and in the Fallout series, and I thoroughly enjoyed them for their storytelling and the freedom you had as a player to be whatever you wanted to be. But does the magic of what their best games delivered carry over into Starfield, and is it appealing to the typical gamer nowadays and not just Bethesda fanboys? Starting with the character creation, this is arguably the area of the game that excels across the board. For being a role-playing game, Starfield enables you to fill whatever fantasy you're looking for as a player, from your looks down to the traits and background that defines your character. Just as an example, you have dozens of presets and can customize nearly every aspect of your body, including your size, walk style, hair, and pretty much everything as it comes to your physical appearance, letting you basically mirror how you look in real life if that's what you want. Now, some people on the internet got triggered that the game lets you select the pronouns of your character, but the only thing I'll say on this is that people must have missed the part where this just lets people fill whatever role-playing fantasy they're looking for, and that if this doesn't apply to you, you can just bypass that selection entirely. When it comes to the main quest, this is where I have to admit the game is extremely lacking. I'm not saying that the entire story is bad, but the way the first half of the game starts is anything but monotonous. If you hear someone saying the game doesn't get good until you're 10 or 20 hours into it, then that's because it's true. The reason for this is because the story starts off by going through the background of all of the core characters and introducing you to all the key locations in the game as well. Once you've done that, the questline starts sending you across the universe, repeating the same task over and over until you've collected some items and gained some powers. The last half of the questline is where it starts to get good and interesting, but even once you get to the climax of the story, it fails to give you any real sense of an ending or any closure, which is most likely by design. When the story wraps up, it gives you the option to New Game Plus, where you lose everything but your skills and your level, but gain the ability to start the story from the beginning, but with some pretty comical and cool twists on the main quest, and some other new items to boot as well. Where the main story lacks is where the faction missions and side quests pick up the slack. Starfield has 4 main factions which each have their own in-depth questlines. Some of the faction quests are more rewarding than the others, giving you things like ships, weapons, and armor, but the overall narrative and storytelling of the factions is what makes them phenomenal. The best part about the design of the faction missions in Starfield is that regardless of what decisions you make, it doesn't lock you out of the possibility of doing the others, which is a huge bonus to the player. The side quests also have some pretty cool narratives, but one of the downfalls when it comes to them is that unless you know where to look for them, and even if you go out and explore the universe, they can be very few and far between. The shipbuilding in Starfield is extremely well designed and is the most ambitious aspect of the game. If you're coming into the game hoping to build any ship you can think of, then you'll be very satisfied. The platform for building ships is extremely expansive, with many different ship brands and vendors giving you each their own unique look and feel. Already we've seen people making crazy ships, some being reminiscent from iconic movies, and others that are just straight wacky. Even though the shipbuilding in Starfield gives the player tons of freedom, it lacks any capabilities to let you preview the functionality of your ship or the interior. To add on to this, it can also be confusing to players about where to find different ship vendors if they want to build a specific type of ship, because certain ship parts are either locked behind skill levels or different physical locations. Now, saying this isn't to take away anything from shipbuilding as a whole, but rather to highlight where the game fails to explain key features around it. Now, I might catch a lot of hate for this statement, but combat in Starfield is insanely underwhelming. I've been playing the game on very hard ever since I was about 20 hours into the game, because the gunplay doesn't offer much in the way of difficulty. You could make the argument that I'm using a powerful gun or that I'm using the damage multipliers from stealth, but the issue with combat extends beyond that. The guns offer very little in the way of variety, with the exception of different ammo types and traits that can roll on them. I went through the entire game hoping to get a unique weapon that would amaze or wow me, and found nothing. Yes, you do get some unique weapons as rewards here and there, but they're nothing that blow you away and are easily replaceable by a gun that you can modify yourself. If you had thought of going for an unarmed or a melee build based off of the Starfield Direct, then you would feel extremely misled. The melee weapons are overly bland, with all of them utilizing the same 3-hit combo and are all restricted to one-handed weapons. The unarmed build is just as bad, and the skills you unlock aren't even enough to make either the melee or unarmed builds viable throughout the entirety of the game. I will admit though, the most enjoyable part of the combat system is the space combat. The space battles are where all of the difficulty and effort in combat comes into play, with there being some fights and bosses that I actually couldn't beat unless I leveled up some of my skills or upgraded my ship. The exploration in Starfield is exactly what you should have expected from a semi-realistic space game. Ever since the Starfield Direct, we knew that there were going to be 1,000 planets, with 100 of them being able to support life, to make the game still feel grounded in reality. So if your expectation was to find planets filled to the brim with content, then you played the game with the wrong mindset. Some people have complained that it feels mostly barren or empty when exploring planets, but this shouldn't come as a surprise with how massive the world is. The game's utilization of a procedural generation engine along with handmade points of interest actually works very well. The handmade structures all intertwine seamlessly with the procedurally generated content, where the player will barely have any issues with the environment. Some people will say that they see the same layout of structures reused over and over, like the cryo lab and abandoned outpost, but it shouldn't come as a surprise to find reused content with how big the scale of the game is. The biggest issue I have with exploration is the lack of a map. Even if you're in a city, there's no HUD or any indication of where vendors are, and you can't even talk to an NPC to find where something as simple as a doctor is. While you're exploring, you can also take advantage of outposts, but honestly, I feel like this was a big miss on Bethesda's part. You can go the entire game without ever having a need to build an outpost, and there isn't much explanation on how to utilize them either. Personally, I didn't use outposts much other than as a way to farm resources for modding my weapons, but once I found out I could just buy the resources from vendors, I didn't see a use in them anymore. Having played the game for 120 hours now, I've definitely enjoyed the game. There's tons of fun content to find and play through, but the problem is how hard the game makes it to find the content. I went into Starfield expecting a grounded and semi-realistic space RPG, and with that mindset, I wasn't disappointed. If you want a game that fills your fantasy of space exploration, with some science fantasy and combat sprinkled in, and I do mean lightly, then you'll be happy. But if your expectation was for a brand new AAA game that would be packed with battles at every corner, with content constantly engaging you and grabbing your attention, then this isn't it. I'm not saying that Starfield isn't good, it's just not ambitious and it doesn't break the mold. It has its fill of Easter eggs stemming from other Bethesda games, but it doesn't feel like it was built on what worked with previous Bethesda titles. Overall, I would recommend you play Starfield. I find it to be an enjoyable game for people who enjoy RPGs and are excited around the topic of space. Just make sure you go in with the knowledge that the game is not fast-paced and is grounded in realism. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.